Great, we'll make a start. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Sue Riley, the Chief Executive of NACE, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the first primary member meetup of the term. We know that you've been really incredibly busy this week and last, welcoming children back into school, but we also know that it's taken you significant planning to get to this point, and we know that you're flexing that plan each day. And so for us, really, the timing of today's session is really important. It's designed to help you pause, consolidate some of your thinking, and importantly see what peers across the NACE network are doing as well. And we can see from your feedback ahead of this session that there is definitely significant ambition attached to this return, but we also know that you've got significant unanswered questions, and we hope to be able to reflect and answer some of those today. And a welcome really to a strong mix of schools across England, Wales, and some of our international members as well. So before we get started, just a few points of housekeeping. You know, most of you obviously are familiar with Zoom meetings, but just to let you know that the main session will be recorded, but we don't record the breakout rooms. The recording will be available to you and other colleagues and schools more widely in the next few days. You can choose to have your video switched on or off, and we would just ask that your screen name shows your full name and your school if possible. That helps for discussions as well. When you're not speaking, if you could stop audio feedback by pressing mute, that would be really helpful. And if you've got any queries, please type those into the chat box. Format of today is around an hour and a quarter, which will include some time for group discussion in the breakout rooms, which is a real key part of these NACE sessions, and importantly for feedback as well. So the focus today, as you know, is beyond recovery. And when we invited you to take part in today's session, we asked you two questions. We asked for a very brief outline of kind of core things that your recovery curriculum was going to use, what your approaches were going to be, and what some of the key issues would be that you would like us to address today. We'll write that detail up shortly. And of course, we'll discuss it more widely today. And we'll also share with you, as I said, the recording of last week's secondary school member meetup curriculum as well, because we think it's very important that we have the opportunity to share and link with peers cross-phase as well. So without exception, looking at your feedback, there's a clear focus on PSHE and well-being, which must be at the fore, of course. In terms of early priorities, there is clearly a focus on developing a strategy that has to work to logistical restraints. And in primary schools, you're noticing that most keenly when you're looking at how you can support collaborative learning and working with learners. There's also, importantly, a focus on consolidation and questions around effective assessment as well, and some solutions that we'll share with you today. Also, you are focused very, very much so on maintaining ambition and challenging provision, and that's across the board. And through that, clear focus and a discussion around curriculum design and the development of some new and high quality resources as well. There's an appreciation that you're showing too from lessons that you've learned from lockdown. And in particular, we saw that within your feedback in terms of some of the ideas that you're thinking about how you might support more able learners moving forward. So whilst today we won't be in a position to present best practice, because of course you are developing and designing that now, we'll be very much be creating a forum in which you can open that discussion more widely. And then from there we can decide how we might form the next stage of support for you. And so really without further ado, and with this in mind, I'd like very much to introduce our presenter today, Dr. Keith Watson. He'll be leading today's session. So we're fortunate enough to have Keith as an ACE associate. He's got over 30 years experience working in primary educational settings, and he's most recently been a Multi-Academy Trust Chief Executive, a teaching school leader, and he is a published researcher. So Keith led the work at Portsmouth Primary School, and some of you will know that that was the first school in the country to attain the NACE Challenge Award 3 times. So I hope you will have had the opportunity, or if you haven't already, to have the opportunity to look at some of the written work that Keith has done for us, most recently around the recovery pack as well. So it's my pleasure now to hand over to Keith to run the session and to talk to you this afternoon. Thank you, Keith.
Hi everybody. Hope you're all well. So I just get my just get everything set up, ready to go. Okay, is that good for everybody? Laura's going to give me the thumbs up to say everything's good. See, what's going to happen is you're going to think I'm multi-talented and can do all these things, and really Laura's doing everything magically behind the scenes, but there we go. First of all, thank you everybody for being here. As Sue said, you know, you're giving up your time after school, and we know that's tough. What does that say about you as professionals? It shows that you're committed. It shows you want to improve. Shows you want to get better, and that's what it's all about. Certainly in this presentation and then discussion afterwards, I'm not going to be talking about really what has to be done. We're going to hopefully stimulate thought and ideas about what could be done and the sorts of things we need to be thinking about. You might have read the article and there's do's and don'ts in there, but I tried to write it in such a way that the do's were do think about this. And actually, it's a job of all of us to work out what that means for us in our situation, leadership situational. So all we say tonight, what does that mean for you, whether you're in Cambridgeshire or Kent or Bradford or wherever you happen to be? You know your children best, you know your schools best. And you know, particularly these days, having come back into an unusual situation, what do you need to focus on? What do you need to do, as it were? I'd urge you, if you haven't already done so, to read Neil's paper on this article as well, this subject as well. He did a great webinar last week, and so many parallels obviously between secondary, and also Emma I had a chance to chat to as well. You know, what she wrote about the early years. There's absolute, you know, key things there right the way across. I think we should be stealing from secondary. I think we should be learning from early years, or put it the other way around if you want. There's so much we can share at the moment in terms of the situation and what we can learn. I think a phrase I use all the time is better. We're always looking to get better. There's a fantastic book by Atul Gawande called Better. He talks about airlines and how airlines is the best industry at getting better. Sadly, when there's a crash, they look at everything and deconstruct it all. There's no hiding to work out why it shouldn't happen again and how they can improve. I think that kind of mentality is what we need all the time. You know, we're all trying to solve this problem at the moment of coming back and what that's like. And the more we can share, and hopefully that's what we'll be doing tonight as well. We're going to have some poll questions, and miraculously they're going to appear any second. And I'm going to do absolutely nothing to achieve this, but it's still going to happen because I've got such trust in Laura. So if you have a look at the questions there, first one is just about describing your role in the school, or whatever your role happens to be. And there are also some questions going to come up about how you feel now and how confident you feel towards the end of the year, as it were. But first one, looking at what best describes your role in school. Okay, so we've got a mixture of roles there, which is good. We move on to the second one. Really what I want to get out there is, as it says, how are you feeling now? How's it going now? Okay, that's good. So we're feeling positive. We're feeling good. Oh, we're going even more. We're feeling even better. There we go. So 80% of us, we're feeling pretty confident, as you'd expect with this audience, I would have heard, but there you go. And then we've got another question coming up. Just about it going forward. By the end of the year, how do we feel you're going to put it right? Okay, so it's interesting. So that's actually saying that although the majority still feel more confident that they'll do well by the end of the year, less confident actually than how they are now. And that might be to do with what children have got to achieve by the end of the year. So where are we? Well, NFER looked at this back in June, July. They suggested 75% of teachers didn't feel that they're able to teach as they would normally like to do. What did they pick out as main reasons for that? Well, the things they focused on a lot was the problems with group work, which you'll recognise, and also the ability to move around the classroom and how difficult that was. And be interesting to see now, you know, after a few weeks back, I know colleagues in Wales have been back longer, But, you know, is that playing out? And we're going to talk a little bit more about whether that's the case. It almost feels like if we, you know, I don't know if we've forgotten about the summer and how we felt and, you know, what parents were feeling and what it was all like or whatever. But we're back now. And what are we going to do about it? And how are we going to move forward, particularly with our more able learners? There's been a lot of talk, isn't there, about learning loss. And I think that's important. You're already working out what does that mean for your class or the classes that that you teach. I think it's an important point here, and a long quote, but really if we look particularly just at the words in bold there, we keep saying, you know, you get all these figures about what's been lost and whatever, and that's an interesting words we're using as well. I'd be more interested in what's, as it says there, the difference between the learning that's been forgotten. Is some of that learning still there? We talk a lot now, don't we, about long-term memory and so on. But actually, will that learning come back quickly? Is it not really lost? But it might, in those first few lessons, those first few works, feel like it's been lost. Is that the right phrase? If we think about our early years colleagues as well, we've had it's not so much learning loss of the experience they've maybe missed out on, whichever setting. You know, children who've not been in nursery that much before they go in to year R or whatever. Children in year R, of course, who haven't had their full experience going into year 1. And I think that, so that's just an interesting to think about what has been lost, what wasn't learned we'd ideally like it to have been learned, but also what has been learned and might appear that it's lost, and will it come back? And I think that's really interesting for our more able children, just getting that spark going again, getting that imagination going again, revising things. And I think we might find that things do come back perhaps a little bit more quickly than we thought. So when I talked about the sort of do's and don'ts, one of the things I talked about was focus on rebuilding relationships. Obviously, you may have read the Barry Carpenter work on this. You will have done a lot of this already, of course. You'll have settled the children back in routines and systems. Hey, it's business as nearly normal, and away you go. And you've created that supportive learning environment. There's always this concern about, well, we're going to spend so much time before we got to the real learning. And I think every school has to make that decision and get the balance right with that. But we do need to move on. And a key thing, in the words of Lafayette, is what did I miss? What did I miss? Interesting for pupils and the difference between what a teacher thinks they might have missed and what the pupils might have done. So how are we going to find out what they've missed? Well, I'm sure you're using quizzes and questions, and there's a revolutionary thing called lessons. Apparently what you do is you teach, and then you find out the children know stuff. It's you know, I think this should be tried. You will have a variety of ways in finding out. So let's not panic, and let's look at what they have learned and maybe what they need to learn again or revise a little bit more. Obviously, tests are part of that. And a word of caution with tests, obviously each school's different and each school will have its own policy in terms of whether they use tests or whether they don't use tests. So obviously we just need to be careful with that. Had a secondary school colleague speaking last week who said they always do pre-unit assessments, but they were just holding back on that, maybe doing that a week or two later. You're going to do a test immediately and find out they've forgotten everything. Well, I'm not surprised in the first week or two. So actually the timing's an interesting one about that and what those tests looks like. And we know, talking about, you know, low stakes testing and things like that. There's a radical thing as well called talking to the pupils, particularly with the more able pupils. What do they feel? Because your perception might be different to their perception. Do they feel that actually the subjects that they're really confident in and really that they're absolutely fine are the subjects that they do well in, but perhaps not as well as they excel in other subjects? Maybe they're worried about that. Maybe they're, you know, the kind of kid who's going to get 120 on their maths in year 6 and whatever. Their English is great, but they only get 114. Oh, terrible, whatever. But their perception might be their English is not as strong as their maths. Oh, they're really worried. Have they fallen behind? So that's interesting then at looking at that and what's their feelings and perceptions. And of course, bit by bit, what are you going to do? You're going to find out. So let's dig a little bit deeper here. When they came back, I wrote in the article about, you know, I think my nightmare was that everybody was going to have to spend 17 hours writing a recount about what lockdown was like, you know. And actually, yeah, there needs to be some room to reflect on their experiences in lockdown. But actually, what about using their talents for that? If you were going to reflect on lockdown, you got a great performer. So, well, can you show me what lockdown looks through dance, or through a short sketch or whatever? Artists, come on, how are we going to do this? If I gave you a biro and a blank bit of paper, how would you show lockdown or whatever? So, I think that's important in terms of, and I know you will have done part of this already, but there's a way of actually building the confidence of the children as well in whatever area they're particularly strong in. I think we need to be careful of the words that we're using sometimes, as I said, about catch up, recovery. We need to be careful here about our language, making it sound like we won't recover. You know, and there's a danger and a pressure on a year 6 teacher thinking, oh, they've got to score 118 in their maths by the end of the year. And obviously there's a great danger that could communicate to the pupils. And that's not going to be helpful at all. So we're positive, we're upbeat, we'll do what we can do, you know, and really we'll get there. And I think those of you who are MAGT leaders, I think you've got a great role in this as well, in terms of reminding other people of that and keeping other members of staff positive. And maybe people are a bit worried about, you know, the attainment of their higher ones, and it won't be as high as it should be, and all of those kind of things. But I think some reassurance there from you on that can be really useful to colleagues. Talking to colleagues, I think there is a potential issue. You won't overlook the more able. You give up your time on a Tuesday to come and do extra webinars. You're not going to do that. But we all know our colleagues, and this is not, you know, we totally understand this. They're fine. Those kids are fine. They're doing well. Look, they've written another brilliant thing. Oh, look at that history recount. Amazing. Oh, that's great. They're fine. With the pressures, of course, to get to expected. The pressures for other areas. And it's not to say these are not important, of course, for disadvantaged pupils, for your SEM pupils and whatever, but we know the light is often more focused on those other groups, far less perhaps than the more able. So remember what I said before, you're the champion. You're the champion for MAGT. Whether you're a class teacher, whether you're an MAGT leader or another leader in the school. And that's got to be at the forefront of your thinking there. Yes, there'll be that pressure, as I say, unexpected, but what could happen? These children, more able children that look fine, what do we see? They become bored. There isn't a lack of challenge if we don't watch it. Or the challenge is there, but I'm putting all my feedback somewhere else, I'm doing this somewhere else or whatever. And actually they're not being challenged as they should be. And in that sense, they could be overlooked. So what's the other pressures? The curriculum. Obviously, there'll be that feeling of the English and the maths missing out, and English, which is actually reading and writing and handwriting and spelling and grammar and everything. It's always been those things, but obviously there's a danger that the curriculum can be dominated even more in recent years with that. So is there an issue in your school for you to think about in terms of the danger of narrowing the curriculum and what that might mean? Now, I'm all for making sure our curriculum, we're teaching the most important things and teaching those bits well. So there can be a little bit streamlined in that sense. But I suggest you don't necessarily go for the plan I've got on the next slide. So see what you think about this as a way of getting around the challenges of low English and maths attainment. Now, I don't know if you've been in schools where that might be the case. I don't know if you feel some days it does feel like the case. I think a year 6 teacher on about April the 30th or something probably does feel a little bit like that at times. And obviously we've got to try and resist that. And we know with all of the children that we teach and the talents they've got and where they can flourish and all the rest of it, we need that broad and enriched curriculum. There will be pressures at the moment, the panic to, you know, oh, they forgot this in their English, I've got to do that in their maths. But actually, obviously, you're teaching the child in the widest sense. And actually, for all children, and here we're talking about the more able, they need to flourish. They need to apply the skills across the curriculum. Some of the most wonderful cross-curricular stuff. And we know, guess what, some of the best writing we ever get is in our history or geography lessons and so on. So we need to make sure that that curriculum is not narrowed. It's an interesting thing for leaders to think about. Do they ever actually just go around every so often and say, you know, look at somebody's timetable again and say, well, what was the percentage this week? You know, well, did we teach 63% of our time? Was it on English and maths? What was it? You know, if we add in the grammar and the reading and all the rest of it, what was it? And what does that need to look like in our school? And if we're trying to develop more able geographers and more able computer scientists and more able artists and whatever, but we're only given 25 minutes a week of art, how's that going to work? How's that? It's not going to work, is it? And you know that, but it might be just interesting to see, is it worse at the moment? Maybe school policy might have to be worse at first, but that won't be sustainable, will it? And I'd suggest with children coming back as they are, we want to motivate and excite and inspire and everything else. And much as I love my English and I'm a bit of a math nut as well, but you know, that's not going to do it, because we're all here to teach a wonderful primary curriculum in the widest sense. So perhaps not the answer. What we're really trying to do, of course, is this, isn't it? That's what we want to be doing. We want to be building confidence. Some of my SEN colleagues often talk about when a child is demotivated, struggling a little bit, the 80-20 rule. You know, that 80% of the work is fine, but let's have 20% a challenge to build up confidence, to get children really motivated again. Obviously, that changes over time. Now, we want more challenge than that, of course, but I think just the philosophy behind that's interesting, isn't it? As I said before, children coming back, maybe they're a bit nervous, maybe they think they're not doing so well with their reading or whatever. They're probably still doing brilliantly with it, but they may not feel it. So how do we just build up that confidence again? Maybe get, in cricket terms, we'd be saying get some easy runs on the board, and just, you know, get going with it. That may have already happened for you. And often off we go, and, you know, we're really building that confidence. Can't do it for too long because we'll get bored again. So actually we need that challenge. But again, you know, you'll learn as best. Area where I've had most concern across, but also in particular with more able, is in the writing. And obviously the expectations, getting to great depth by the end of the year and what that looks like. And if we ticked off the 57 bullet points that are in the latest criteria that we haven't even seen yet, because they might change it again this year, but we'll see. But the point is, don't panic. You have a plan for writing, whether you're in year 1, you're in year 3, you're in year 6 or whatever, you'll have the plan you were going to follow. And obviously with your colleagues, you'll be considering that plan and to what extent is it still right. Step by step, not rush by rush. Are you still going to do all the writing tasks you thought, or are you going to spend a bit longer on some than others? Are you going to come back to some later in the year just to edit and improve or whatever? You'll have the writing criteria, obviously, to look at, and that will guide you to an extent. But get your heads together with other people in your schools and beyond as well, and look at what that might mean, and just say the game plan you would normally have, to what extent do we still have that? I would suggest it will be a bit of evolution, not revolution. You know, throw the whole thing out. Well, why would you throw the whole thing out? Some of it was really good last year. You don't want to do that. But what might need to change a little bit because of it. The other thing we talked about earlier is back to, in terms of reviewing the teaching methods, is what were the particular challenges? And I'm going to ask you to talk about this later in the breakout groups as well. So the lack of group work that could be happening, and you can tell us if that's the case. Maybe we're into paper and all kinds of things on the floor, like we often are. I think the discussion there, if we can bring it in, and I know there's issues with how much children can talk to each other and face each other and all those kind of things, but I think some of that group work can be done. The language is so important, the discussion is so important to that learning and promoting that class group discussion further, and finding ways in your classroom to be able to do that. I think IT provides an opportunity as well, that children could work on a something, could write a Scratch program, and then somebody else could do the next bit, and somebody else do the next bit, and whatever. Films being edited and all kinds of things like that. I think there's some possibilities there, and that's where we might need to be creative to manufacture group work that looks slightly different. I know a school that I've worked with an awful lot has some amazing geography projects where children work in sixes, produce the most incredible poster boards, and it's one of the most amazing units, and that's done in the third week and third to the fifth week of every September and whatever. They're looking at how that looks slightly different now, but they'll find a way. They'll find a way. We talk about feedback as well. Obviously, emphasis on verbal. Well, we need an emphasis on verbal. You know, some of the obviously best feedback is in real time to children as they're working. We had Paul Black visit us about 15 years ago. If you ever walk around a school with Paul Black next to you looking at AFL, it's like having God on your shoulder, I tell you. But he seemed to like what we were doing. He said it was marvellous. I fainted, but there you go. But the point he made actually was the amount of verbal feedback staff were giving there and then to move learning on. And that's interesting, isn't it, in terms of that's no different now. And in fact, it's probably more heightened now. If we're not writing in books so much, if we're not doing all those things, which I think is a good thing anyway, but actually really are we sharpening that verbal feedback we're given. And I'll talk about four-quarter marking in a minute. Obviously, we've got checklists. We think about the writing we just said can be a challenge. So we've got our checklists or our success criteria. Colleagues are telling me they're using visualizers more now. So they're being able to put the work under the visualizer up on the screen. Everybody can have a look at it, can edit together and so on and get the feedback this way. Might be about that book, but actually wider. Some teachers taking photographs. So in a key writing session at the end, the children are on their way out with a phone, bang, 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 photograph 8. Have a look at them later. Next day, feedback to them. So that's an interesting way of capturing. Obviously, some people say, yeah, but I've got to take them out to break. Oh, yeah, I realise, and everything I say today, there might be a, yeah, but you can't. But we've got to try and do these things, I think. And only by trying a lot of them, some of which won't work, we will come up with some that do work. And interestingly, we might come up with a few that we keep when the world's back normal because we realised it was better than we're doing. Dare we admit that? I don't know. What are we trying to do? We're trying to think, as we always do for each lesson, what's the key for the whole class, for groups and for individuals, and then some of those that MAGT group and the individuals within it, because we know they're not just one homogenous group. So how's our learning just different, you know, just slightly different for them, and what does that look like? I mentioned the people might be familiar with the Dylan Wiliam four-quarter marking, and I think this is really relevant here. So this is some of his research from a long time ago, and he was saying in terms of marking for a class, marking detail, a quarter of the class, or a quarter of what students do, I should say. Then another quarter is self-assessment. We need to train the children up to self-assess well, and we know it's, you know, and more work done on that could be helpful, particularly at the moment, as we say, maybe you're not getting there to individuals with the feedback, you're not there with your pen hovering over the books or whatever. So actually self-assessment is going to be important, perhaps with the checklists we mentioned. And then peer assessment as well, in terms of getting children to reflect on their learning, which is what we need to do. And maybe you skim around another quarter of the class. So, okay, it's not, you know, it's not a rigid rule or whatever, but I think that's an interesting way of looking at it. And actually, I think there's pleasingly been a shift from not marking kids to death and actually making sense of the learning that's gone on within the classroom. So guess what? Tomorrow's lesson's adapted accordingly to help. I don't think that's a bad thing. So actually, what does that mean for our more able learners in terms of what do they need from what I've seen in that lesson, however I've gleaned it? In that sense, I think we need to remain optimistic and ambitious. I keep using the word of champions. You know, that's what we've got to be. We're all champions for children, of course. We're actually champions for more able. We need to keep that optimistic thing and keep, you know, thinking about, oh, well, what's lost, what's gone? Yeah, it's done. What we're going to do, blame. I have a nice saying, I have a saying that I use a lot, which is blame no one, do something. Because we can all keep blaming. Blame no one, do something. Okay, this is what I've got. Here's my class. Here's my more able. What am I going to do about this? The red flags, I think, red flags are a warning. So what's the warning? I think the warning is more able, slightly disengaged, not so motivated, not so challenged. Maybe not responding as much. Maybe not, you know, producing what's normally produced. Okay. That might be because of the situation, but actually just looking out for what those red flags are. We're here to inspire these children, aren't we? Do you know what? A lot of the time the knowledge will take care of itself. I saw this on a bag, actually, believe it or not. This was on a bag, and it's from LAMDA, the London School of Music and Dramatic Arts. And I love this. I'm sure that you talk to your pupils as a whole and more able, we're artists today. Yeah. We're going to be, you know, we're tennis players today. We're scientists today. And you use that language because that's what you are and that's what you're trying to be. And I think that's absolutely wonderful. I just think it's interesting the language on here as well in terms of motivating them. And right, we're back in business, folks. You're creators. Yeah. You're going to do this work today, but can you be an innovator? Can you be an innovator? Well, what's that? Well, let's talk about what that means. There might be a little bit of less of collaborator, but we've said we might get ways around that. We don't write up stories. We don't put it in best. We're storytellers. We publish. We write anthologies. That's what we do. We're engineers. We make things. I went to Finland a few years ago. You know, Finland was all the rage, so I thought I'd go and have a look. And it was fantastic. I was there 3 days. The sun came out for 10 minutes on the second afternoon, so I knew it was still there. But anyway, but it was fascinating, and it was a privilege to go around Finnish schools. I watched 15 lessons. On the Ofsted schedule at the time, 13 were inadequate because that's not the point. They had a completely different agenda, and it wasn't about learning in that 40 minutes and all the rest of it. It was a bigger agenda they had. One thing I took from Finland that I love was they made stuff. They made stuff. And when I say made stuff, I don't just mean in a wooden sense or what are there. Although I did see a worksheet which was labelled a chainsaw. You don't see that so often in Cambridgeshire, Neil. I know. I think it's a gap in your learning. You need to look at it. But it was interesting. They just made stuff. And when I say that, I mean, you know, big stuff, and you know, as in the entrance hall, and then, but also, yeah, books and kind of things. And I think, particularly for our able, they've been creating, making stuff is great. And I think, and I know, you know, looks like arts, you know, year 11's doing DT, might have to do an exam without making anything, but you know, we'll get back to it. And actually, I just think that notion of, you know, we want to reignite these children and get them going again. They're again doing stuff, technical term stuff. Stay with me on that. Engineer, artist, actor, perform things. You know, that's what we need. Neil made a really good point last week about little research projects and actually, you know, giving children or getting themselves to come up with research questions to answer. And I really like that. Got to be careful. We don't, you know, well, there's your research question. I'll see you in 3 weeks' time. Good luck, everybody. Because we need to guide and challenge and all the rest of it. But I think that, you know, there's opportunities there, I think. And we really need to, you know, get them fired up. You know, we've got to go in a mentality, we're going to beat this and whatever, overcome it. That's what we've got to have from them. You know, there's a couple of lines I wrote in the article. Those of you who got vigor at 4:22 on a Tuesday, well done, everybody. You know, that's great to see. But actually, we're about talents, aren't we? And as teachers, you want to see those talents. You want to see the dancers, the mathematicians, the computer scientists doing brilliant things, and actually finding ways to do that. Because you know what? Doing that will motivate them, but it'll motivate you, and it'll excite you. And that's really what you want to be able to do. And it's easy for me to talk like that, but that's really what we want to do. And I know you'll take care of the knowledge base. I know you'll take care of, you know, those technical elements. But I think there's more of a danger that we don't snap back into the excitement, the celebration, the energy, and all the rest of it. Because that's what we're doing. Every day you're doing it. Every day you're going in thinking, not just how can I teach semicolons because they might die without them, but actually, can I actually inspire them today? Semicolons are really useful and they can help us write brilliantly. But actually I want to inspire them to think about how they can use semicolons so they can write brilliantly. And that's what we're doing. So this is what you're doing every day, folks. I don't know if you realise it, but if people say to you, what did you do today? Well, here's another Hamilton quote for you. So just have a look at this. So what did you do today? Well, I taught this, or did you actually, you know, plant a seed? Now, what's interesting, of course, is you do often plant a seed, as it says in the quote, that you don't get to see it grow. You do at times, don't you? Because you do something and a child or two take it brilliantly and do something really exciting and motivating with it. And you see the outcome and the brilliant artwork or solving a math problem or whatever it be, fantastic. But of course, the other thing is sometimes you don't get to see it till the next year or the next year or the next year or whatever. But that doesn't stop it being worthwhile. So I think my message at the end of this is use your professional judgment as you do to make the decisions you would always make, but obviously they're slightly modified by the situation. The do's and don'ts were about do think about this, do innovate. And I think it's really interesting for our teachers. And dare I also say for some of our stronger teachers as well, isn't that an interesting challenge for them to think about, okay, I've got one hand tied behind my back here a little bit. What am I going to do about that? I think that's really interesting. I can't wait to see the research that comes out generally about how teaching innovates in the next 6 months. And then I think there'll be some great stuff for NACE to look at in terms of, you know, the changes that were made for More Able and how that looked. And as I said before, perhaps what we keep and what we've learnt from it. So thank you for planting seeds, and I look forward to tomorrow. Everybody says when you're off to work tomorrow, say what you do. I'm just planting a seed. Yeah, it's a legacy. You know, I'm just like Hamilton, really. Anyway. Okay, he's pontificated enough, I think. So we're going to go into some breakout rooms in a minute. And these are the questions that we'd like to look at. I'd like to hear about the adaptations that you've made so far. Obviously, I've said a few there, but you'll be full of far more brilliant ideas. And it's really useful to share them with it, I think. Also, we talked about feedback. That's the thing I'm getting a lot from some staff about how it looked, and I mentioned the Dylan Williams. But how's that working for you? And are you finding different ways to do that? So the adaptations you made, and then, sorry, it says how you giving feeding there. That's good. Sorry, how you giving feedback? Sorry about that. And then really, what do you want to try? Is it feedback in a different way? Is it more adaptations? What do you really want to try? Go on, be brave. What have you stumbled upon already that you think, there might be something in this? I might try a bit more of that. I might try that. So adaptations you've made, what feedback are you giving or how are you doing it? And what might you try?
Interesting discussion there. In terms of adaptations, we had quite a range. We had Megan, who's over in an international school in Bremen, where all the key stages are together effectively in one building. So it's primary up to the end of key stage 5. But Aoife in London, Claire in Wales. And I think it, again, as we saw in last week's webinar, there's a range of where people are starting from again. So that sense of recovery, are we recovering or is it still business as usual? I think colleagues in the UK are finding that, yes, it's a matter of finding where we are now. It's kind of feeling out, as we always do. What do they know? What don't they know? What's been forgotten? What was never learnt? And so there was certainly in terms of assessment, certainly UK colleagues were keen that it was low threat, as you're saying. Aoife was mentioning, okay, that staff are being encouraged to think creatively about how to do a prior knowledge audit, for example. Maybe not even use that language, but little tasks that engage, but also give you a sense of who knows what and who doesn't, which, again, as we discussed and you brought up in your presentation, Keith, is what we do anyway. So it's not walloping them with some formal assessment. It's finding out where they are, more able students and others, through inventive, creative, light touch assessment. I think was something came through, no heavy audits. I said Catherine from Salford as well said that they were trying still obviously to work out those deficits and where there seemed to be in particular threads, particular subjects. Sorry, I'm a secondary teacher, but if geography, there were particular key areas, key deficits in knowledge, is there some way of next term weaving them in through other subjects or other strands? So that was kind of interesting. And in terms of what people were doing about feedback or what they wanted to try elsewhere, it did really hinge on feedback. So Aoife was first in line and was saying that there's a lot of visualizer use, and that colleagues were learning how to use this and were getting quite interested in this. This is something I found very interesting as a secondary teacher, because we've been using visualizer the last year and a half. And I think, oh yeah, all primary teachers are doing this. God, aren't they streets ahead of us? And not necessarily. So it was quite good for me to find out. But then in terms of marking, lots of dot marking. Okay, if I put a dot by this, have a think. Okay. And Aoife was saying that, yes, both students, of course, and teachers need to learn how to do that, but you could use the visualizer to do that and model it. use of highlighters, as I suspect has been going on for donkey's years, you know, growing green and perfect pink or whatever way you do it. But that was being used a lot. And of course, I think from all colleagues in the discussion, interested in accepting that, yes, feedback, verbal feedback, in the moment feedback is just going to be very important, and keeping that lively, how most able learners can fit into that. I mean, I'd suggest how to lead them, get them to guide discussion, really. I think aiming your discussion at your more able kids can lift the whole tone. But I think those are the main points that we made there. But please, Aoife, Claire, Catherine, chip in if there's anything I missed. Nope.
Yep. Okay, great, thank you. Elaine, are you speaking for your group, or?
Sarah's speaking for our group.
Oh, great.
But if there's anything else.
Thank you, thanks, Sarah.
So I'm going to feedback. I'm in a shared office, so you might get some background noise, so excuse that. So we discussed what we were doing, whether we were doing anything different. We were talking about having whole school topics that sort of brought the whole school together, getting to really know the individuals and their lockdown experiences. In Claire's school, they started their maths curriculum not with place value, but with a measurement topic, because their topics, this is me. So they're doing a lot of measuring and data handling to really sort of engage the children and bring them in, as opposed to starting with place value, which I know lots of us have been doing. In my school, our teachers kept their classes in the first half, keeping their old classes in the first half of this term, because we sort of know what the gaps are, and it's sort of seeing the classes that didn't come back after lockdown, seeing whether the gaps are what people thought they were, because how much support they were getting from home, and also because they know they're more able pupils, then you can kind of put that challenge back in, and you know how to engage them, and then they'll start off with new teachers with a really good handover in October after half term. I think we just talked about the fact that it's really difficult sometimes to know what to do and what not to do, and we're all dipping our toes in and worrying too much about our risk assessments and that side of things. But we were sort of saying, like, we were talking about whether we had any adaptations for more able children, we all said that there's so much of a focus on finding the gaps, that actually it's at the moment it's just kind of taking them up and really just trying to keep them engaged and inspired. I'm sure I've missed things, because I kind of lost a bit of focus. At one stage. Did I miss anything about that side of things from my group? Then we talked about feedback and just sort of the mini assessments, short diagnostics. This was still having mini projects on using Seesaw, inquiry-based learning, but being a priority. Sorry, that's going back to the first question. Feedback, we're talking about some schools not taking books home. We talked about checklists, peer assessments, training the more able to be able to support other children and give feedback, doing the majority verbally, and that side of things. And then we were talking about what would we really like to try, and that was a difficult question, and what we have tried. And I suppose it's just getting used to the in inverted commas new normal, which is I don't know, a phrase that I'm coming to hate at the moment, but yeah, just getting used to having the children back and having them together and re-socializing them. So that was it. Have I missed anything from the group?
No, that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's really good feedback. Maybe we need to get our more able children to write the risk assessments. Maybe that's what we're doing wrong. We're just missing a trick there. But it's interesting, and thank you, Sarah, for that, and the feedback from the groups in terms of some of the things that I was saying, and that feedback. And it'll be interesting, won't it? As I think Sarah made the point, they're still coming to terms with it. But what little bits you start doing and you do more of. And actually, I could be onto something here. And also the point was made there, if we're going to have you know, more self-assessment and those kind of things. Stating the obvious, but we have to train our children to do that well and understand that well and model that well and all the rest of it, and giving time for that. And therefore giving that balance to, and also do all the children in the class need the same amount of training in that sense? And it might be more able, are already doing that reasonably well already. I use the phrase cut away all the time in terms of my teaching, and it's, you know, question I always have with any class is, who do I need here now? Which means, who needs to be listening to what I'm saying at the moment, whether it's instruction or knowledge or whatever. And actually at times that might not be the more able need to be here now. They need to be doing what they need to be doing or whatever. And so that notion of cut away to get on with the work that they can do, providing, of course, they've got that self-regulation and all the rest of it, that they can work effectively. And as we mentioned before, not just be left to it and cross your fingers and hope they do something reasonably well. But I think that would be interesting as we go forward, which of these things we've talked about generally are used even more, as it were. So thank you for the excellent feedback on that. And looks like we're going to be planting some more seeds tomorrow, so make sure that happens. I'm going to hand back to Sue now. I think she'll probably want some concluding remarks. But thank you everybody for engaging in those questions. I really appreciate that.
Yes, Keith, thank you very much, and thank you colleagues as well. I think, you know, one of the comments that Sarah made was that we're all learning together, and that's very true. So having the confidence to try new things, I think, is important, but in the fullness of time, being able to review and reflect on what's worked effectively and how we might flex the model moving forward, I think will be important too. And there's lots of overlap, I think, between the primary and the secondary member meetups that we've run over the last couple of weeks. So what we will make sure that we do, and I would encourage you to do so, is to listen to the kind of the opposite member meetup. I think that's very valuable, and to share it more widely within your school as well. And then our next offer to you is to ask for some feedback. So feedback on today's session, feedback on what it is you would like to focus on next. So we've talked about some quite broad themes today. I think it might be quite useful to drill down into some of those specific areas that you've highlighted. So please let us know. And this forum works very effectively, I think, in being able to share that. So just very briefly, a reminder, the Beyond Recovery resource pack, we will be adding to that. So that's where we'll add the member meetup recordings and other resources as well. And if you haven't already had a look at some of the CPD that's upcoming this term, please do. In particular, one of our new courses, New to Leading on More Able. So for MAC coordinators, 5 sessions, as you see over the half term there, I think is a valuable course that you might want to consider. Then, of course, the benefit is that you have the recordings that you can share back with colleagues as well. And then a couple of others for you to consider on there too, but obviously you'll have the regular news feeds from NACE in support of that. So just for me really to say again, Keith, thank you for the session today, and to Elaine and Neil for helping to facilitate those breakout rooms. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you very soon for another online session. Many thanks.